wanted to create this feeling that as if they were all in conversation with each other in the room, like they're talking to each other. And so even though all of these interviews took place in different places, and I have to say, one of the most beautiful compliments I've heard about this book is a couple of people who were in the book were like, I felt like I was having conversation with those folks, and I had to remind myself that we weren't in a room together, it was just you and me. So that was a really lovely feeling.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. It's lovely to see all of you. Welcome to today's event with Caro De Robertis, the author of So Many Stars. I'm Maxwell Dionisio Vanderwarker, Chief Administrative Officer here at the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues, and an MFA student at San Francisco State University. Yeah. I want to thank all the sponsors of tonight's event: Night Out, Night Off, Gender Equity Resource Center, the Center for the Study of Sexual Culture, Trans Student Wellness Initiative, Townsend Center for the Humanities, and the Multicultural Community Center. Special thanks to Nanette Coleman, founder of Night Out, Night Off, for suggesting this wonderful event tonight. I want to start off by acknowledging that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with university values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and our commitment to hold the university more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. On a personal note, I'd like to invite all of you to Google or Duck, if you prefer DuckDuckGo. The Shumi Land Tax is run by Sogoret's Hay Land Trust. I invite you to pay a voluntary land tax to Indigenous peoples. Today, we will have a presentation from Caro De Robertis, who will also read from their new book. Then I have a few questions for Caro, and I'll also invite questions from you, the audience. I also would like to welcome those of you joining on Zoom as well. You're welcome to ask your questions. You can use the Q&A feature to ask questions. And if you're here in the room with us, if you could just please silence your cell phones, I'd really appreciate it. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Caro De Robertis, a professor at San Francisco State University, my professor of creative writing, and author of So Many Stars, an oral history of trans, non-binary, genderqueer, and two-spirit people of color. Caro's other books include The Palace of Arrows, which won the Golden Poppy Octavia E. Butler Award, The President and the Frog, a finalist for the Penn Faulkner Award and the Penn Gene Stein Award, and the international bestseller, The Invisible Mountain. Their books have been translated into 17 languages and have received numerous other honors, including the John Dos Passos Prize for Literature, which they were the first openly non-binary person to receive. Until August 23rd, 2026, you can also check out the exhibition De Robertis co-curated at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in downtown San Francisco. It is called Conjuring Power: The Roots and Futures of Queer and Trans Movements. Welcome, Caro. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes a todos. It is such a joy to be here with you. Thank you for coming and feasting on the food and being in community. It's really my joy to be here, and thank you, Max, for that lovely introduction. It is really my joy and honor to be your professor. So I'm going to read very briefly from So Many Stars. And I know this picture has been up here this whole time. This is my daughter. This is just a very quick anecdote about a time when she was in kindergarten. She's now 13. She's about to graduate from middle school. But at that time, she was in kindergarten. This is her then. And I said to her one day, I'm going to be home late tonight because I'm going to a university and giving a lecture. And when I got home, she said, Mommy, I've written a lecture too. And I said, really? And she showed it to me, and this is the lecture. Now, kindergarten is amazing, the letters that happen. So I'll help translate. That says, this is our town. This is our truth. Now, truth is spelled with an F, T-R-U-F. This is our truth. So I brought this because I have to say that since that time, I kind of felt like the bar is raised so high. You know, this lecture kind of really just like says it all. She just sort of said it all. I wanted to just bring that to you. This is our town. This is our truth, and we're celebrating our truth here together. I'm going to read a half a page from the introduction and then some of the different parts of the book. So this book is arranged in chapters that are thematic. There are 20 narrators. They are all genderqueer, non-binary, two-spirit, and trans elders of color. And their voices are sort of woven together. And this is part of an oral history project that I was part of for a year in 2022 and 2023. Here's a very brief snippet of the introduction. A gender revolution is happening in our culture. It is not without roots. It is not new. Today's trans and gender expansive movements are part of a deep, rich story. Gender variance beyond the binary has existed throughout history in every society, as natural as any other part of human existence. And yet, even in an era of increasing visibility for trans and gender nonconforming people, legislative attacks on our rights have also risen sharply. Meanwhile, mainstream portrayals of trans and non-binary lives rarely feature elder generations, let alone elders of color. A myth persists that transness is an invention of the young, a fad that can be easily dismissed. But the truth is that those of us who are trans, non-binary, genderqueer, two-spirit, or otherwise gender variant have a lineage. We have an inheritance. We are part of radiant cultures and histories. As for elder, trans, and gender nonconforming folks of color, they are right here among us with plenty to say. Their lives are testaments to our true histories and to the intersectionality at the heart of real freedom. Their voices are essential to a full picture of who we are as a society and who we might become. So the chapters sort of go through time. There's a chapter on glimmers in childhood of people's true gender, coming up and coming out, transition, migration, so many things. And I'm going to skip forward towards the last two chapters. So the penultimate chapter is thoughts for younger generations. I'm going to read a tiny snippet from each of these people's voices. And I brought these slides so that you could see their faces and follow along. These are the photos I took of folks on the day of interview, just with my iPhone. Fresh Lev White. What I want younger generations to know, we're thinking of them. We know that they're coming. We are all, in our own ways, making way for them. Josenio Lewis. The journey is always going to be amazing and scary and revealing, and the journey never ends. It doesn't end until you take your last breath. So there's always a chance to learn something new. There's always a chance to learn a new way to be in connection with someone. There's always another opportunity. KB Boyce. No matter how terrifying something seems, if something in you says, no, you need to be doing this, you've got to just do it. Just go. Just go. Keep going no matter what. That's where I feel like the ancestors have been there for me, just going, you know what, child, do this thing. We've got you. You are going to be okay. That's what has driven me. I hope that folks, especially youth, can find the things that give them that bravery, that strength, like punk rock did for me, so that they can move forward and just say, to hell with it, I need to do this. Because we need the youth to do that. We need you to be brave, and no matter what, just do it and create the next wave for the ones who come after you. Sharon Grayson. You can be who you want to be, and you can be happy. Don't accept anything less. You are entitled to it, just like everybody else. Be you and enjoy. Understand this is such a precious gift. Life, live it. Live it in a way that you hope to leave something for the others who come behind you. That's it, KB Boyce. We are the dreams of our ancestors. Yeah. And finally, a short snippet from Visions for the Future, which is our last chapter. Yay, I did it. Last chapter, end of the book. You get the spoiler. Visions for the Future. Adela Vasquez. The future is bright if we want it to be. Nikki Kalma. We're everywhere. Joan Benoit. All the right-wing stuff that's happening throughout the world, it's happening in a bunch of countries. I think that's their last hurrah. They're hanging on to that last little straw that they thought. They know they're a dying breed. That's why they're being as charged and violent as they are. Adela Vasquez. Look at where we're at. You think the queers at large are going to allow people to come and oppress them again? No, no, child. There's going to be somebody who's going to say, fuck that, fuck off, get off my dress. I don't want you to oppress me. It happened before, back in the 70s. We were pioneers in many ways. We learned how to fight AIDS. That was very important. And we didn't know half of what we know now. Bambi Salcedo. My hope is that you understand that you do have power, and not just individual power, but also collective power. We need to be able to exercise that power. We need to be able to change the structures that have marginalized us for many, many years. I believe that it could happen. Even if I don't get to see that, I believe it will happen. My hope is what keeps me alive. Fresh Lev White. That's the vision. Human liberation. Joan Benoit. Safety for everyone. C. Njobe Dugas. Just freaking stay free. Tina Valentina Aguirre. Fuck shit up. Fuck shit up. Do something that fucks everything up and then make something grand. Donna Persona. Two magnificent things. Tina Valentina Aguirre. I think we have an obligation. I have an obligation to put something that's wondrous into the world. It doesn't matter if it's short term. I need to be a part of bringing this magic alive. So can you. Nelson Dalerta Perez. There is space for everybody in this world. Fight for it. It's right there. All you have to do is claim it.
First off, thank you again for being here with us at Berkeley and for being in conversation with me. I'm really excited to get to discuss this book. And to start, I just wanted to share a little bit about my experience as a trans person of color reading this book. It was so moving for me. I felt so warm reading it. I felt really, really some people have really fond memories of their grandparents listening to stories from their elders. I don't really have that.
Yeah.
And so I got to kind of have the experience of getting to sit on the floor at the feet of my ancestors and have them tell me about their lives. And it was really so beautiful and it was so enriching to see where we come from, to see our legacy and how long of a legacy it is. It's not recent. We've been here forever and we will continue to be here forever, no matter what politics and the world and people want. We're going to be here. So I wanted to start off with that opening. It's just that I was so moved and touched. It brought to tears a number of times reading this book. So I had to thank you for writing it, bringing it into this world, and also to all of the people who shared their voices. I feel like they're all my family now. I wish I could give each and every one of them a hug, because reading their words was just so impactful. It's really beautiful. So I have some questions for you, and then we'll also have plenty of time for Q&A from the audience if you all have questions, and from Zoom. But we're gonna start with at least one of my questions. And so one of the things I'd like to ask you is, in class, we talk a lot about who's our audience for our books. And in last semester class with you, we thought about these nested kind of Russian dolls or Venn diagrams for different audiences. And it really kind of made me really kind of confront, who do I write for? I kind of came to the conclusion, most of my stuff is through weirdos, really, really weird people. Just that's my target audience.
Weird people need books.
Weird people, really need weird books. So I was really curious to kind of know, like, what was your audience when you began writing this book? And did your audience change as the book developed or even after you had finished it?
Amazing question. Thank you so much for that question. Also, thank you for the things you just said about the reading of the book and the experience. That was extraordinarily moving to hear. And really just one of my wildest dreams, honestly, for this book in the world is that even one person would have such a depth of experience with it. And it's really in alignment with the intention of the book because so many of these people, as you know, because you've read the whole chapter on thoughts for younger generations, it's just like such an unfold, like enveloping of younger folks. There's so much love and encouragement, and like we're here and we're your people, you know, even if we don't come from the same lineage or have the exact same story, or we weren't there when you were born. Like we are a community across time, and these elders are our inheritance too. And there are, I mean, every single person in this book except one is alive. Adela Vasquez did pass away before the book came out unexpectedly. And she's, you know, this incredible trans Latina icon. She's very missed. But really, people are like still out here living, breathing, and part of a fabric of connection. So it's really powerful to hear that you received it that way. And those are elders that so many of us need, right? Because, you know, most queer and trans folks don't grow up in a home culture where we inherit our queer and trans culture, right? There are exceptions, like my daughter, this little one right here, you know, she's inheriting it at home, but most of us don't get that at home like we do some of our other cultures. As a Latinx person, I received that part of my culture at home, but you know, we have to go out and find our connection to these lineages. And my hope is that books can be part of that. I think in terms of your question about audiences, yes, we created these sort of concentric circles in thinking about audience, where like the last concentric circle is really like everybody and anyone who's moved by a book. And we can often be surprised by who reaches for or connects with a book, who we might not always think of as our audience. But sometimes at the center, it might be like, you know, 16-year-old me who really needed the book, you know, or, you know, queer and trans people of color, something that might sound very particular and specific. I think for me, this book was really born because I was in the fellowship. The fellowship was organized by writer and MacArthur Fellow Jacqueline Woodson. She pulled together 10 writers across the country, each to do a gathering of oral histories of elders of color. She invited me to be part of the project specifically for queer and trans elders of color of the West Coast. And so there I was, you know, going up and down the West Coast with my little microphone and my recording equipment and going into people's homes and sometimes offices, but often the kitchen table and the living room, and sitting with them, and their generosity in opening up their stories was so incredible. And I felt a lot of things that are parallel to what you just expressed myself, like personally, I felt so incredibly nourished by getting to bear witness to their stories. And I felt such depth and power and importance in what they were sharing, even about their everyday lives as kids, or like how they navigated adolescence. It felt so significant and so under-recognized in literary culture and in culture at large, that I just really started to feel this incredible pull to put it in a book, so that it could go further out into the world. So in my wildest dreams, that core circle of the concentric circle is really like the people who need it, who are nourished by it and connect with it. Yeah, you know.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm so excited, like knowing, you know, like when I think about like myself as a young person, a child, a teenager, like where I'm originally from the Midwest. Like there were not visible trans people at all where I was from. I'll sound like a total bumpkin when I say I came to California when I was 18, and like that was when I met like my first out trans person. And I was just like, wow, okay, like this is a thing. I didn't even know, like, you know, I have all these misconceptions, like, oh, you have to always know since you're a child. And I was, when I was 3, I didn't have a gender. Like, I just didn't have one, you know, like I was 3, you know, what 3-year-old has a gender? I didn't. So I, you know, as a teenager, I was like, well, I can't be trans because like, oh, I would have always known.
And so then we might tell ourselves, right, maybe I'm not really trans, right, I don't get to have this.
Exactly. Like I was like, okay, well, there's something else weird going on with me. It's not that. And then, you know, when it came out here and I actually got to like meet and talk to and have like full conversations with trans people, I was sort of like, oh, everything makes sense now. Like it's kind of like the light switch flipped for me, and I was like, oh, okay. And luckily I was able to kind of have that experience when I was 18, 19, and then I very quickly was like, okay, I see what I need to do now. And so reading this makes me really excited because I think about like, if I had seen this at the library as a young person, I would have been like, cool, yeah, I would have read it, and I would have got it so much sooner.
Because you'd be able to locate it
exactly,
articulate yourself.
Exactly. Like I saw so many, like we talked in class a lot about windows and mirrors, the mirrors of like seeing in a book yourself reflected, and then also being able to see the window into other people's lives. And I saw so many just rich windows and mirrors in this book where I was totally like, I totally see myself in this. Like I feel represented, I feel cared for, and like, acknowledged. My existence is real, and it's valid, and it's not a weird one-off kind of existence. So that is really exciting to me, and I hope that this book goes so far. I want it to touch everyone. And I was tell you earlier before we started, like I want to send this to my cousin, but not my copy. He doesn't get my copy, but I want to share it with so many of my younger loved ones that are in my life that like I'm their trans person in their life, and I'd be like, hey, it's not just me either. Like, don't let your uncle tell you that I'm weird. Like, I am weird, but this isn't why I'm weird.
Yeah,
right. This is not actually the weird part of me. It's a lot of other things that are weird about me. Like this is not. This is the one. So I hope to see this book just keep thriving and getting it in the hands of the people that need it.
I mean, I appreciate so much about what you just said, and thank you for sharing all of those pieces of your story. And I think, it is true. I mean, it is true for some people. Like the first chapter, Glimmers in Childhood. One person says, I've always known. I've known since I was 3, and then the next person says, I didn't know. I just wanted to be who I am. So I that was part of the richness too, was interviewing all of these different people who have very different kinds of trajectories. Including people who, have a binary gender, trans men and trans women, absolutely represented in this book. And I really wanted to make sure that representation was deep and solid, that there was, there's 2 Black trans women, there's, like at least 2, a lot of trans Latino women, but then there's people who are, and then, Latino trans masculinity, men. But then there's also people in the book who are genderqueer and or non-binary, who identify as trans, but don't have that binary gender experience, and it's a different kind of trajectory, and they get to have their whole gender too. We get to have our whole genders, whatever shape they might take. And sometimes we might see one kind of representation, and if it's the only representation we see, and we can't locate ourselves in it, then we might think, oh, maybe that's not for us. Which, maybe it's not for you, but also maybe we fade up feeling of like, oh, now I don't get to have this. Maybe I don't get to have my whole gender. That's maybe a sign that there is something in us, right? But we need lots of different kinds of mirrors, right? So I really wanted to show a range of different kinds of experiences, because we, trans and gender variant people, are dazzling in the vast, wild array of possibilities, right? It's so beautiful. There's so many different ways of being inside of our true genders, and I wanted to uplift and celebrate that in a way that a collective book can do, because no monovocal book could fully embody that, right? We have really important, great nonfiction by and about trans people of color, like Janet Mock's memoir. I'm a fan. Redefining Realness is a really important book. And she says in the book, I can't represent everyone. I'm one experience, which is true, right? So when you have 20 people, the attempt was to make like a symphony of different voices, right? So that it says a little bit more. It's still not going to be fully definitive, only 20 people to represent, the dazzling range of our genders and cultural truths. But I wanted to create something where there was more spaciousness and reflection of, all the beauty of who we are.
I think one of the fun things to me about this book is that incredible range about how many different genders and experiences you get to see. Mm-hmm. And there are so many where there are definitely some where I was like, God, like this is totally like really aligned with my experience. I really like feel like I understand this person's experience. Right, that's the mirror. But then there are also so many other words where I read that and I was like, I've never thought about gender like that. Or I've never had that experience. And it's so cool, you know, for me to get to, you know, hear kind of like, I love hearing the way other people experience their gender and experience their body and just like their personhood. I can only understand my one experience, but getting to hear like other people's just very different experiences of clothing, of performativity and makeup and like an art and everything is just like really, it's just so fun, right? Because you get to be like, wow, like I've never thought about gender in that particular way.
It can be so joyful.
Yes.
Right? Like, I mean, being trans is so beautiful and amazing and joyful and magnificent. And also, you know, something about which there's a great deal of social hostility, and there's managing all of the realities of, you know, backlash and oppression and all of that. But I think it's important that we talk about those injustices and those realities and the traumas, and not lose sight of the beauty and the joy, right, of being in our whole selves. I mean, also one of the things, like we were just talking about how all, you know, the 20 people in this book have a really rich range of life experiences and identities and trajectories. And one thing that they all have in common is, as people, you know, in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, as like later Gen X and Boomer folks, every single one of them grew up in an environment where there was no language for who they are and what they are, right? A couple of them talk about like Nikki Kalma talks, the one who said We're Everywhere, you know, talks about like growing up in the Philippines and going to this hotel lobby where this trans woman is playing this massive organ, and she was like, you exist. And, you know, she was 13, she'd never seen a visible trans woman, and she's like, you know, and she describes that experience. So, but even that, it's like she got to see something, but she still didn't have language, right? She talks about like in the Philippines, if you are a person assigned male at birth and you start acting feminine, they just call you gay with many pejorative words, or at least where she was growing up in her time, right? But there wasn't more language, you know, there wasn't a recognition that this was a gender identity. And she came from the Philippines as an adult to the United States to try to be free. So, you know, it's just an example of the ways in which every single one of them has, you know, didn't have enough mirrors, didn't have enough language or vocabulary for who they were. And yet, this is what I find so amazing about all these folks, is that, and yet, they found a path. They found a way. They created themselves. They realized themselves in the face of that. It's a beautiful form of cultural innovation that queer and trans folks have always been about.
I think it's such a like timely and important lesson for us in this political world that we're currently living in, to kind of remember that like we can forge our own paths, and even in the face of hostile state violence and discrimination, like we can still exist.
Absolutely.
And you know, we have this legacy, this richness of people forging their own paths and unabashedly and fearlessly being who they are, in times that are even more hostile than what we're currently living in now. I think that's so wonderful and really, really incredibly timely for this world, this strange world we're currently living in right now. Before I ask you more questions, I'd like to open it up to the audience in case there's anyone who would like to ask a question. Please just raise your hand, and if you could just enunciate. Yes, go ahead.
So this is a question about the mechanics. Can you talk a little bit about how you chose the questions you asked, or the way that you approached taking the oral histories? And I mean, obviously you've organized it into various sections, but I assume that came later and maybe wasn't how you structured the questions or the interviews.
Wonderful question. Thank you so much. Yes, so it wasn't at all part of structuring the questions, because when I was conducting the interviews, it wasn't to create a book. The book was something that took hold as a strong desire as I was sort of sitting there being blown away by people nutting the microphone, you know. But the project was about capturing people's oral histories in extended audio interviews for an online archive, which is live All of these interviews are available to the public to listen to at Insight, which is the Columbia University Center for Oral History Research. So this wasn't a Columbia University project, but it was Baldwin for the Arts, which is Jacqueline Woodson's nonprofit that she founded. And Baldwin for the Arts collaborated with the Center for Oral History in Columbia. And so their archive houses our interviews. So you can find them under the I See My Light Shining project. So that is to say, part of preparing for the interviews was we got training from the Columbia University oral history faculty, the master's program faculty, which was really wonderful because we were not coming to the project as oral historians, and I felt very humbled that I was being asked into this, because there are people who practice it in a very deep way, perhaps in this room. There might be like researchers and oral historians here. But the idea was that as storytellers and writers, journalists, novelists, poets, that we were bringing a different perspective. And what Jackie said when she texted me with the invitation to do this fellowship was, she said, it's kind of a continuation of the work you have been doing, in the sense that, like, one of my novels, Cantoras, is a portrait of lesbians in Uruguay during the dictatorship in the 70s and 80s. And I listened deeply to women in generation older than me for about 15 years before I created that book. So that oral history research for some of us novelists is part of it. So coming from that background, but we got really great training from these longtime oral historians, and some of the things they talked about was the balance between planning questions, absolutely, and sort of staying flexible and fluid in the oral history interview, because sometimes a person is talking about their father in childhood, and they might actually tip into when their father died 20 years later, but in that moment, a memory might be opening, and you kind of follow your instinct and go with it. So I kind of held a balance between the questions that I prepared and kind of going with the flow of where people were. And one of the most valuable pieces of training, which again may be familiar to some folks in the room as oral historians, was don't fear the silence. If somebody's silent from what it might be, watch them. They might be tipping back into a memory. And wait. It's sort of the opposite of, radio interview, or has everyone here ever been interviewed for television? Okay, so it's really fast. You have to have your answer right in the moment, right? And so the oral history is the opposite. It's this very long, slow kind of context, and I found that very beautiful and profound. So that's how we sort of help. There's one question that I ask absolutely everyone, which is, can you tell me an experience you had in your childhood with gender euphoria? And some of them didn't know the term gender euphoria. So sort of define it like a feeling of joy and well-being, at being in your true gender. But every single person had a story, and they were often some of the most moving moments.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
As well. Kind of piggybacking off of that, one of my other questions for you, I really liked how the structure of the book is you kind of present a topic, and then there will be these short quotes before going into a more lengthy story. So
the chapter opens with some really small little slices from people.
Yeah.
Before going into longer stories. That's a good observation. You're on to me.
Yeah. So let me see. There's this part on page 74, 75. Adela says, after I finished school, I could not stay. I couldn't stay in Cuba. Cuba was too small. I knew that I needed to leave because everyone was going to jail. In Cuba, they take you to jail for the smallest things, and it was pretty much against the law being gay. And then Nelson chimes in right after, in Cuba, we were very oppressed for being gay. Then it kind of goes into more kind of stories about what was going on in Cuba at the time. It was just the one that I happened to write down, but I noticed that a number of times. And I really liked how you kind of use these different voices to present, we're going to talk about this section.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was hoping you could kind of tell me a little bit about how did you decide the order of quotations and kind of building into that structure?
That part was really I almost feel a little bit sheepish about admitting this, but it was really fun. It was so much fun. It was very joyful. It was sort of like doing collage. You've got this pile of old magazines and you're cutting out pieces, and you're like, let me just slice this piece of a red dress and just splash it across, working with shape and color. So I really loved doing that. I mean, the way I did it is I went through all of their transcripts, once I'm like knowing I'm doing the book, and I just put things into buckets. I reread them and said, oh, this is childhood. In Cuba, we were very pressed for being gay, but this is a line about immigration. And so, there might be a migration chapter. I'll put it in there. So like putting things into those buckets, and then going back into those buckets and kind of shaping more finely and trying to create something of a, if not a narrative arc within the chapter, at least like a thematic arc. And so it was really fun and joyful to get to put, people's lines near each other. And sometimes people say 2 sentences, but it feels like it lights up a theme. So that can go, and then other times people are telling this long, deep, extended story. When do you give something a page or 3 pages? It was a beautiful thing to do. In that part you read, you have 2 voices going back and forth about one subject. And so I also tried to look at places where people had talked about the same thing. And I really wanted to create this feeling that as if they were all in conversation with each other in the room, like they're talking to each other. And so even though all of these interviews took place in different places, and I have to say, one of the most beautiful compliments I've heard about this book is a couple of people who were in the book were like, I felt like I was having conversation with those folks. And I had to remind myself that we weren't in a room together. It was just you and me. So that was a really lovely feeling. But like that allowed there to be, again, there's diversity within experience. So like to have a complex discussion, like for example, the chapter on what is gender, there's a moment of discussion about Two-Spirit and the meaning and nuances of Two-Spirit. And so the people who talked about their experience as Two-Spirit Indigenous people, kind of going back and forth between them, Land O'Lakes and Joan Benoit. And then there's a couple of Black people who were part of communities in the 90s where people said, come on in, you can identify as Two-Spirit. And then they were like, actually, no, this is just for Indigenous people. So their little experiences, like slicing them into that as well. Or like there's a discussion in the transition section of 2 or 3 trans masculine Black people who talked about, the assumption that once you pass as a trans man, once you pass for cis, that it's like you get all this privilege. And they're like, I am more likely to be shot by the cops. And that is not my reality. And sometimes white trans men have assumed that's going to be my reality. And they're talking to each other about how, the Blackness piece is really another layer and is also really real. And then Miss Billy Cooper, I took a line from where she was like, I'm always gonna be Black, she's like, I'm always gonna be Black, doesn't matter how much I transition, the Black is here, this is a reality. And that is part of how I navigate the world, and she kind of says it in a salty way. So I sort of put them together, to be kind of in dialogue.
Yeah, I really love, like, I felt like it was so artfully kind of like, I never like kind of like sat there, I mean, like, except for when I was reading, like, really like kind of like, I'm really thinking about craft, like when I would note that page, I was kind of like read it and I was, oh, that's so interesting. Hold on, let me like pause for a minute and like think about this as a writer and not like as a reader. But that was like something I kind of like, I made myself do occasionally, because generally speaking, I felt like the journeys that I went on in this book were really like, it just flowed really, really well.
Oh, good.
Like, like the way, and like everyone kind of feeling like they're all talking to each other. There was never a spot where I kind of stopped being like, well, how did we go from like this to this? It was just kind of like, we were talking about one thing and it just kind of naturally flowed into talking about another thing, the way conversations do, right?
Like conversations.
Like conversations.
Yeah. I mean, this is part of coming to this as a novelist, right? I mean, I've written 6 novels before I did this, and I think I've translated 6 novels from the Spanish in addition to the 6 I wrote. So, just being inside of novels a lot, just having practice with and being a student of, that kind of narrative flow, being able to bring it to like found material isn't really quite accurate, but to things that already exist. That was my hope. So, I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah, I definitely think I came off that way.
Because I wanted to read like a narrative. Like I want people can jump in and be like, oh, I want to read about, like, part of why I made the thematic chapters is I want the book to be utilitarian. Like there's a chapter on family matters and a chapter on thoughts for younger generations. Maybe there's a cis parent who wants to know how to support their young trans child, and they can just jump to those chapters. You know, somebody who's interested in the history of trans of color activism can jump to the activism chapter and the AIDS crisis chapter. You can jump around, but also I wanted to do as much as possible. I know I like to be transported by books, right? So I wanted to like create that more novelistic kind of feeling.
Yeah, I definitely felt like there was really like an ebb and flow. Like, there's a real movement, which like yeah, you're a novelist, so it makes sense that like there is this kind of you can take us on a journey. Whereas when I've read other kind of more academic texts by like researchers, it's more kind of like, here is the subject I'm going to talk about in this chapter,
right?
And then the next chapter is like, this is another subject, and there's less of that kind of movement journey. Which is fine. Not everything requires a movement and a journey, but I'm a fiction reader and a fiction writer, so I like to go on journeys.
Yeah, and to be clear, I love scholarly books.
Yes.
I rely on scholarly books because I've written novels that require so much historical research and other forms of research that, I've read books by scholars and appreciate them immensely, whether they're historical or they're like critical theory, I'm all about it. I've much appreciation to folks who are doing that work. I want to read it. I just happen to be coming from a different angle.
I'd like to open up the floor again to anyone in the room or on Zoom.
How did you find who you wanted to interview, and then choose out of? It sounds like there was a large pool and you went down to 20, but what was that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's 20 in the book. There were 30 altogether that I interviewed, but the project was queer and trans people of color. So not all of them are trans, non-binary, gender variant. There's a few absolutely fabulous, like cis, gay, lesbian, or bi people of color that are in the oral history collection as well. So I started out really with my own network. Like I was absolutely free to create the list myself. That was part of my job as a fellow in this program, as opposed to them giving me a list. So I started with my own communities. I mean, I'm really fortunate that I have a lot of community among queer and trans people of color, having just like been in the Bay Area for all these years, being myself. And so I asked folks like, what elders do you know who you think should be part of this project? And got recommendations from folks and started developing a list. And then there were some people that I knew that sprang to mind. And then every time I interviewed somebody, I, especially in the beginning, like the first 25 interviews, by the end, it was like, oh, now I've got this really long list. I'm going to have to choose who those last people are. But the first 2/3 of the time that I was interviewing, I always asked people, if you know anyone who you think I should consider as a potential candidate for the interviews, please let me know. And there were a few, some elders were like, I've given you an interview. I mean, there was an honorarium and everything, and people were very generous, but some people weren't really in a space to recommend. And then there were people who gave me these incredible lists and treasure troves and offered to put me in touch with people. Sometimes people who like don't often say yes to interviews, but then there was this kind of trust that was built. Caro has come and interviewed me. I think you'd be great for this. Caro's okay. And so having that kind of like in community trust. So there was so then it would just sort of like spread from there. Really, community is essential, right? And at the same time, I also wanted to make sure that my collection of interviews was as representative as possible. So I also did my own research. So for example, Bambi Salcedo, who had talked about the importance of collective power. I didn't have a personal contact with Bambi Salcedo at the time. She's the founder of the Trans Latina Coalition in LA. She's like such a treasured, community member, an icon. She's very high profile. She does not have time for everybody. She's in the Trans List HBO documentary, but that's a short interview. It doesn't go deep like an oral history does. But she's very busy. And I reached out just cold and asked if she would consider an interview. She said yes. And this fellowship program had the funds to fly me to LA to do the interview. So there were definitely a lot, or like Landa Lakes, who is an amazing Indigenous activist and drag queen, and sort of, like Two-Spirit leader. I didn't have direct contact with them either, but like doing my research, I thought this is a voice that I'd really like to include and represent. And they said yes. So it's a combination.
there any other questions from the audience at this time? Yes, please.
What do you think is the best way to like authentically translate someone's memories or ideas onto paper? It's like you know, like when you're listening to them, you have a lens, right? And like when you're reading a book, I imagine that it would take some time to like, you know, revise some of it. So how do you keep it as authentic as possible when you're writing?
Yes, that's an amazing question. And I love that you use the word translation because I'm also a literary translator, as I mentioned. And so I really felt like I had to bring my translation toolbox to this process. And I think you're absolutely right that it is an act of translation from the audio, right? There's the audio of somebody speaking and telling their story. From that audio onto like the page, into a paragraph. That is a translation. And because there are actually a lot of decisions that I needed to make. Is it a paragraph or am I putting line breaks? Is it a period? Is it a comma? Is it an exclamation point? Right? All of those decisions are, you know, they're very subtle, but we know that, you know, they have an impact on the reading experience and the page. And I mean, I made those decisions when I was shaping the book. There's also like, it's very normal in oral history to distill what somebody said. Maybe they repeat themselves and they say, just do it, like that piece with KB Boyce where he was like, if you hear the ancestors, just do it, just do it. I mean, he said it over, just do it, just do it, just do it. And it was great. How many just do it's are you gonna keep, right? On the one hand, maybe it's repetitive. Some people might say, oh, just use one or two. On the other hand, is that part of the idiosyncrasy of his expression? Does it increase in intensity with the repetition? And so I tried to hold a balance. And what I can tell you is that I came with a very humble, open-hearted intention of wanting to do justice to other people's voice. So while I ultimately made some of those decisions, I tried to make those decisions in a way that wasn't about like my aesthetic and what I think is better, and exclamation points are bad or great, you know, but rather, how is this person talking? Like Miss Billy Cooper, with the one who made that one salty comment, you know, about like, I'm like she kind of speaks in exclamation points. She's got this like sort of rich, vibrant personality. So I tried to keep that and capture that, you know, in the diction and the punctuation. Or even that line that I read at the end of the Thoughts for Younger Generations. I thought about this a lot. KB Boyce said, we are the dreams of our ancestors. Yeah. Now he said yeah at the end of his sentences a fair bit, but I kept that yeah. You know, it just felt, and I said dreams of our ancestors, period. Yeah, period. So I made those decisions. My intention was to honor the poetics of each person's beautiful idiosyncratic voice.
Kind of going off of that question, one of my questions for you is kind of similar. So I was really moved by the way you did capture the voice and diction of the speakers. A lot of the times when I was reading this, you know, like when I was being really intentional with my reading, I would read the name and then I would read the paragraph. But there are other times where I wasn't really, you know, I was just reading, I was going with the flow. And sometimes I wouldn't even absorb the name.
Like who's who, it's just somebody's having an experience.
Yeah, and then I would notice the different voices. And then I got to like, but later on, it kind of felt like near the end of the book, there were a few voices like I could really identify with Billy Cooper. Is definitely
really? I miss Billy Cooper's one of them?
She's very distinct in the way that she talked, the way you kind of portrayed her diction.
Does anyone else come to mind? Like was vivid or
Fresh White.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, I really like. I could tell when he was talking. Like yeah, I was like, yeah,
Fresh is so deep.
Yeah.
And so like he's like Buddhist, right? He has that like very spiritual perspective,
very calming, like kind of narrative. And so I really enjoyed that. And so I kind of wanted to ask you, like, so like of course as authors and like fiction writers, writing like novels, we always have our own, you know, authorial voice, our own particular style. And so were there any times where you felt like you were able to kind of add your author voice in there into the piece, or maybe you didn't want to do that? And then also, kind of what were the ways that and how did you use language to make kind of clear and visible the different speakers' diction?
Yeah, really good question, and so connected to where we are. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to include my voice. I mean, there's a short introduction. I read a tiny bit. There's like just a contextualizing introduction. That's my voice. But I didn't want my voice to be in the chapters. I wanted to decenter myself as much as possible. And there actually isn't, like, all of the chapters after the introduction are purely the voices of, as you've read, but like they're all purely the voices of the people. Sort of like a documentary that doesn't have voiceover, that kind of feeling or effect. I wanted to decenter myself as much as possible. And I think we have to be real that, as writers and as editors, like, our aesthetic is present. I do feel like this is where my training as a literary translator really came in. I was completely surprised at how much that toolbox became important to me in the process, because it really, in literary translation, like, I've translated people who have like really long, cascading, complex, rich, maximalist sentences. And then I've translated people who have these like very simple, limpid sentences, full of subtext, or like sharp like an arrow. And so you have to think, what would serve this the most, so I tried to really be about them and honoring their voices, but that doesn't mean that your own aesthetic doesn't somehow come in. I feel like where my voice or my aesthetic comes in, if I'm like really gonna tell on myself, since you're asking the question, and I feel like in the whole book tour I did for this book all over the country, nobody really asked me that question. Nobody asked me that question. It's a great one. So I'll tell on myself, and I say I think where my aesthetics most showed up is in the order of things, the shape of things, the shape of the chapters, what I chose to center, ending with thoughts for younger generations and visions for the future, like ending on those notes of hope and possibility, centering like the care and the love, also of course the trauma. I mean, there's some really heartbreaking stories in this book of what it took for people to survive and make a life. I mean, there's a lot of wrenching reality in the book, but there's also there's also all of this meaning making. And I think as writers, one of the ways that we show what's important is by showing what we center, what gets attention and time on the page. And I feel like that's a place where maybe my aesthetic sensibility is present.
Thank you for telling it yourself.
I'm telling on myself.
I think that is so interesting, and I can really see, like, I was saying earlier, how much I enjoyed going on the journey. One of the things that I also liked about it was the way it ended on a message of hope and optimism for the future. I really appreciated that you and all of the elders that shared their voice didn't shy away from the difficulties of being a trans person of color. And the chapter on the AIDS crisis was really, really hard for me to read.
Was it?
It was, I was very emotional reading that. It was very necessary. I felt, I'm very glad and appreciative to have read those stories and to have gotten to witness it in this way. But it was, of course, a very, very difficult section to read. But then kind of going from that section to a very, like, I think it was like drag and like optimism was like the next section. And that was really fun. Like, I was really like, when I got to that, because I was like, okay, like, ooh, like.
Okay, so that's my aesthetic choice. There is that the middle section about like being out in the world making lives. It doesn't end with the AIDS crisis. It ends with the sort of like the beauty and power of drag, right? So that's where it shows up. This is me telling of myself. Or even the AIDS chapter. It's like, it is so devastating, and there is so much like pain and struggle and seeing death and almost dying and all of these things. People who are HIV positive. But then I end the chapter with, we were pioneers and we did so much, and we loved each other as communities, and we came together and we're amazing. So my choice to put that at the end,
I think that kind of like that message is so important, I think, for all of us to like, of course, the AIDS crisis is a deep, deep part of our history. It's an ancestral wound that I think every queer person carries with them. I certainly like see it in my own experience. But like that's not the totality of our experience, of course. You know, it's a deep wound, but it's one, but also in that wound there were opportunities for connection, collective care, mutual aid.
The love.
The love is really
the
incredible.
love in these people's stories about navigating the AIDS crisis is right.
It's really deep, really
Yeah.
deeply moving. Yeah.
Palpable.
Very, very much so. I can see how like, yeah, I can see like that kind of a side choice to like, you know, like that needs to be in there. It needs to be witnessed and shown, but it doesn't need to, we don't need to end on that somber note.
We don't
right?
need to
like,
end yeah, it has to be shown. I mean, I actually initially had one chapter for activism that was going to include the AIDS crisis. And what happened, I was mentioning earlier about putting snippets of people's interviews, putting chunks of the transcript into buckets, thematic buckets, and I put them all in one bucket, which was the activism bucket. But then when I started to look into what was inside that container, there was so much, there was no way it could be one chapter. And the AIDS crisis component of it just like rose up and demanded its own chapter.
I'd like to ask ask the audience to invite you all to ask a question as opposed to me asking a question next.
I have another question.
Great.
Are there any plans to do something like an audiobook version? Something that could, like, I don't know, when you were doing these interviews, if you did video or just audio. I just think of things like a program on PBS or something on YouTube that is really accessible for people, especially younger generations, and maybe
right.
So much, just in general, like I think sometimes people struggle with reading now. So
right.
Of what you documented.
Right, reading isn't we love it when people read, we're all about it, and it's not for everyone. So the whole interviews, not the book version, but the whole interviews exist, like I said, online in the Columbia University Center for Oral History, so people can listen to the whole interviews there. There is an audiobook of this book, and I actually read it, so you would have my voice in your ear for a while if you listen to it, but for better, for worse. But so there is an audiobook version of this book, which makes me happy because I think, people absorb books in many different ways these days. And I know, hopefully many of us have a ongoing healthy relationship with paper books, but audiobooks can be with us while we're driving and so forth. So that exists. And then, what's been beautiful is Max mentioned my exhibit that I co-curated at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, the Conjuring Power, Roots and Futures of Queer and Trans Movements. And it's a multimedia exhibit. It includes a lot of art. We commissioned original art from brilliant queer folks, but it's also a blend of art and archive. And one of the things it has is audio stations with clips from these interviews. There's 100 clips from the interviews, and people can go up and there's 5 different themes, and you can look at people's faces and on like a little iPad installation that's under this beautifully rendered artwork of people's faces, done by the artist Tanya Wisharath. And then underneath you can go into these audio stations and you can go, I want to hear about creating community, Fresh Love White, and you hear like a 1 to 2 minute clip. So that's kind of like another place where it's gone out in the world, which has been really a lovely thing.
I want to also just invite you to talk a little bit about your curation experience, if you'd like, and what was that like? And...
It's been amazing. It was wild, because I have never curated a museum exhibit before. It was all very new, and I got to do it with an unexpected collaborator who is actually one of the narrators in this book, Tina Valentin Aguirre, the one who at the end said, fuck shit up and make something grand. Well, we got paired together to co-curate a multimedia museum exhibit. So we strove to make something grand. We worked really, really hard for over a year on this exhibit. But, in my wildest dreams, this exhibit is certainly a celebration of our queer and trans histories and legacies and futures, but also a kind of crucible that invites us to connect to our lineage, that invites us to connect to our possible futures and to our communities, as a reminder that we are still here and we're always going to be here, and that we're the ones who are going to create the future that we want to see for all of us. So that's, you know, it's been beautiful to do, and it's free on Wednesdays, just for folks.
Excellent.
I love a museum that has a free day, so.
Yes.
How long the exhibit goes to?
It goes till August
Oh,
23rd.
nice.
Yeah.
Where is it again?
It's at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, which is in downtown San Francisco, near BART. Yeah, and it's free on Wednesday.
The next question I'd like to ask is from the Zoom audience. And again, folks on Zoom, on the internet, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. I'd be happy to ask them for you. What are 3 takeaways that you got from doing these interviews?
3 takeaways. Great question. Thank you for that question. I found myself profoundly inspired to, on a personal level, to continue to unfurl and be my own most genuine, authentic self. Having witnessed the incredible courage that so many of these folks exercised in creating their lives, it sort of fueled my own courage to really be fully me as a in my whole gender and beyond. So that's one. Was it key takeaways?
3 takeaways, yeah.
3 takeaways. 2, I found myself very humbled and inspired about like my own future as an elder. You know, I did these interviews and like the age cutoff for what was considered elder for this project wasn't that far away, and I just passed it. You know, so I'm very aware of myself as a future elder, but also kind of an elder now, like middle age, especially for queer and trans people. You know, we came of age in a different time, and culture changes very quickly, and it made me think about ways that I can hold space for younger generations and for future generations, even beyond what I might be able to see myself. You know, like, what do I want to leave after I die? And the way these people shared their wisdom and their long vision really made me think about myself as a future elder and as a future ancestor. And then one other takeaway, you know, the incredible resilience and absolutely indestructible nature of trans culture. Like, and I think that's a really big and very important one right now, because we all know that there are many forces that would like to kill us, collectively kill us, have us be erased, have us not exist in the fabric of society. And there can be a lot of terror in that. I think there's a lot of terror right now for trans and non-binary folks for a lot of really good reasons. And this is a takeaway I got from sitting and conducting these interviews, is that collectively, I mean, yes, individually we can be murdered, we can be oppressed, lots of things can happen to us. Collectively, we are indestructible and we are resilient as hell, and we are here forever.
Thank you for that rich answer. And for that great question as well. Yeah, Deborah?
I have a question that's kind of on that same theme. So I don't know when you started the project, but I'm guessing it took quite a long time. So not that that was like a wonderful utopia for trans people at that time, but the political climate has obviously gotten much worse.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if that led to any, like, some of your interviewees are not public figures, and I wonder if that changed their feelings about being in the book or having their interview, you know, their audio made public, or kind of your feelings about putting this work out at this time.
That's a really good question. That's an excellent question. Thank you. Nobody approached me with any hesitation about being in the book or having the interviews be public facing because of the changing climate. Though that could have happened, but all of the folks I interviewed are people who have been living out loud, proud lives, and have, many of them, I mean, maybe all of them, have risked their lives, right, to walk down the street, to fight AIDS in all of these different ways. So they're really people for whom it's like there's no going back into the closet. even if, of course, there's a heaviness about the recognition of change. The interviews did absolutely take place before the second Trump administration and before the 2024 election. So, you know, when you hear the mood at the end, that's like, the future is ours, we're here, you know, that was a pre-Trump 2.0 mood. And I think some people are feeling, of course, a new level of weight and heaviness. Who isn't? And except the haters, you know, and at the same time, I think a lot of them still are anchored in that. For me, you know, I wrote this book before the election. I was doing copy edits on the book and really just like turning them in when the 2024 election happened. So the pub date was already on the horizon of May 2025. And yes, it completely changed the landscape. And it also completely changed the dynamics of being on book tour. I mean, there was some discussion among public-facing trans-identified people about how safe or unsafe we were navigating airports, you know? I am an immigrant. I'm a naturalized citizen, which is a very privileged type of immigrant to be. But you know, there has been conversation about denaturalization, right? And this government has had moments where it said, let's denaturalize people that we don't like. Well, that could include, you know, people who are, you know, proponents of so-called gender ideology. So I had to navigate some real questions about my safety on the road. And that was something that changed with the political climate. And as a parent, of course, that's a very particularly vulnerable thing. What if I do get, you know, arrested by masked men the way Ramesa Oster did, right, and pushed into an unmarked car? I mean, she wrote an op-ed about the genocide in Palestine, and this happened to her, right? This is the whole book. I went to my therapist and I said, I know I'm catastrophizing, and she was like, you know, I mean, that was a moment. That was a moment. I'm sharing this because I think it's significant to say, like, we do take risks when we speak out. I mean, I literally went and I was like, I know I'm catastrophizing. Here you go. Tell me that I'm exaggerating. And she was like, I think you need to have some conversations with your publisher. You know, so those kinds of, and we're in a different place right now, but first half of 2025, yeah, there was some real risk assessment to think about. Did it make me think, oh, maybe I should pull this book and not go on tour? No, absolutely not. That was not on the table. We continue.
Another question from the Zoom audience. What advice would you offer to fledgling trans / gender expansive and gender non-conforming Black, Indigenous, people of color writers looking to contribute to storytelling?
Oh, fantastic. Hi, if you're one of those folks, I'm so glad you're here. I mean, I'm with KB Boyce, who said in the book, you know, do it, just do it. That thing that says, oh, I really feel pulled to do this thing, but it feels so big and bold, do it. And let the ancestors hold you, you know, and know that we need more voices. You know, you were talking earlier about seeing mirrors in this book that weren't there for you when you were younger and you were like, you know, in earlier parts of your journey. And one of the reasons that we don't have enough mirrors is what we can call narrative scarcity. Many of us have lived for a long time in narrative scarcity. There aren't enough stories, narratives, depictions of trans and gender variant people of color's lives. And so the way that we get from, you know, the way that we get from narrative scarcity to narrative abundance is through narrative justice and through telling our stories and lifting up our voices and each other's voices as well. So yeah, speak your truth, write your things.
Yeah, on a personal note as well, I just wanted to add that I've been writing since I was a literal child, but what kind of pushed me to come to the MFA program was like last year, 2025, you know, just all of the hate and just the awfulness. And I was kind of like, I was just kind of stewing, like, and just kind of like grinding my gears and this kind of like, I don't know what to do. I feel like I need to do something, something needs to give, right? And well, what kind of that ended up was me kind of letting myself be like, you know what, I'm gonna actually like do what I've wanted to do my whole life, because like I could die, like, you know, just like that really feels like I could just die, like, just, so maybe I should do what is important to me.
So when the danger
like,
level rises,
yeah.
it's kind of like what I was talking about the question about security on the book
Right.
tour, right? It's sort of like, okay, the danger level's rising. I can either like hide and shrink down, or I can really step in and do the thing I'm meant to be doing here on the planet.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so that kind of led me like, okay, maybe it's time for me to like take my craft a little bit more seriously than fan fiction.
And that's what happens. And that's part of
And that's
how.
why I'm here. And, well, not, I'm at work right now, but
Yeah, no,
on Mondays,
on Mondays are over with us
Yeah.
at the MMA program, and we love to see it. I mean, I think that's the thing, right? We can have this political pain, grief, and terror. This is very real, and we can let that experience galvanize us towards the work that we feel most pulled towards, and that we need to be doing to help contribute to the great tapestry of making the future possible. We're all part of it. So I'm so glad you did that.
Yeah, I just want to encourage any like queer and trans writer to like, yeah, like come and like join us, like write cool, weird stuff.
Yeah.
Or not weird, so it doesn't have to be weird.
Also, San Francisco State, RMFA, like
We have such a good program. So many great queer people. We have Caro. You can be taught by a queer trans person of color. Like, that's awesome. They can say that about every program.
And I have tenure, so now.
Yes.
So now, thank you so much. And so now I'm really bold, and I'm like, let's teach a whole graduate seminar where we read all trans and non-binary writers all semester. Let's just do this.
That class was truly like, I mean, my favorite class. I've only taken 4 classes so far. But like, I mean, compared to like my undergrad experience as well, like I was like, wow, I get to read people like me. Like, right? This is so meaningful compared to reading, like, I mean, I love like Faulkner and I love like the old white guys, but like I also like to read
the Faulkner.
Yeah.
And also like it can be for everyone. I mean, it's beautiful how many trans and non-binary and queer folks that were in that room. It's like very vibrant, complex conversation. But also people take a Russian literature class and it's like we can all get a lot out of Dostoevsky.
Yes.
Dostoevsky's rocks, right? So that's true about Russian literature. Why not about trans brilliant literature?
It was so cool in that class getting to have like, you know, there were like older cis folks, straight folks as well in that class, and getting to hear their experience about like reading about like our lives and our like, it was just like, I thought that was really fun and enriching, and just like was really personally moving, really, like the world is still good, like there are open-minded people, you know, I get to be in the space with them right now. So that was kind of like a nice warm lesson for me as well. Good. I saw a question in the back. Go ahead.
Hi.
Can we give appreciation? I don't have a question.
Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, you can give appreciation.
Yes.
Sure, that'd be lovely. I might have to like get shy and hide under the desk or something, but I'll try not to.
Okay, I'll make it short. I just wanted to say that I encountered your book through the audiobook.
Oh.
And I really love just hearing those names over and over and over again, like people one after the other. There's a way of like reading quotes where you don't read people's names, but I just really love that we heard those names over and over and over again through the book. And I felt like when you showed the pictures, I was like, oh my goodness, like by the end of the book, like you just had this like intimacy and care for the people. Like they have revealed so much. You learned about when they were kids, you learned about all the different choices they make, all the mistakes, all the trials and stuff. So like by the end, it was just like such a beautiful intimacy. So like I feel like that repetition of their name was such a beautiful, like, not memorialization because many of them are alive, but like such a like what you had said at the beginning, putting yourself at the feet of folks who like have something to say about their experience. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Oh my goodness, that's so beautiful. Thank you. That means so much to hear. Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad that worked, the sort of like, you know, to do that as an audiobook, like the way I read it just now, like repeating people's names. And yeah, but that wasn't too much, but like let you kind of know them, because I wanted them to be visible and palpable again, like really centering them, not myself, even though like it's my voice reading at that time. And I'm glad you ended up feeling like you knew them, because I know I've talked to so many folks who are in the book since the book came out about how like they feel so much like they just want to impart their love, like honestly, like they just have so much love for our many communities, and they really feel so happy that it like lands with folks sometimes. So I'm delighted to.
So we're coming to a close
Yeah.
soon, but I want to ask one more question from Zoom, because I feel like this is a really like valuable and timely question to ask. What would you say to our trans siblings in red states who are feeling unsafe right now?
Yeah, it's a really heartbreaking and serious question. I would say, and it's interesting because I actually, I have done a few events in red states with this book. I went to the Texas Book Festival, and yes, it's in Austin, but people come from all over Texas to the festival. So I spoke to a lot of people in Texas who are going through a whole lot of different things. And I have been very moved to see how much organizing there is on the ground in so many red states. Like the queer and trans communities on the ground and the communities of color on the ground are really holding each other in incredible ways that I think are not always visible to us in California. We can have this kind of monolithic negative picture of what's going on in red states that is based in some terrible realities, but also shouldn't erase like how much community and connection there is among people. So keep finding your community, turn to your people, stay safe, do what you need to be safe. I know that there are people who are thinking about like migrating to blue states. Do what you need to do. And if you're where you are, like just know that you are held by a broader community that loves you. Like I think that's something about us, about trans and queer people. We really are. I mean, yes, we have drama. Sometimes there's drama. I'm not going to deny the presence of drama in our communities and world. And we love each other. Like we hold each other. Find your people. If you don't have your people, seek them out. Seek them out locally. They're often there. And then seek them out. More broadly, nationally and globally. Like find what you need to sustain yourself to get through this. And we're in this political moment. We're in this moment in history. We don't know where we're headed. We, in the big picture, are still winning. I know it doesn't feel that way, but like, I don't know, in Latin America, we have this saying, siempre que llovió paró, which means every time it's rained, it's stopped. So we're in an incredibly difficult storm of history, and hang in there. The future really belongs to us.
I couldn't agree more.
Really?
Thank you again so much. I'd like to invite everyone to give Caro a round of applause. Thank you for